Today I want to start out by talking about regions and how they apply to Iowa. There are many ways of formulating regions. Some regions are embedded in landscapes, others are political or administrative, others defined by population or some measure of density. But it's always people who decide where the regions are. There may be different factors they're looking at. Then we'll look at, in this lecture, which will be in several parts, we'll look at quite a few ways of understanding Iowa by examining regions. So you'll see on this map that there are 8 physical regions of Iowa, some quite large, others quite small. And we'll start with the one in the kind of the center top, the Des Moines lobe. This was formed by the last glacier in Iowa 12 to 15,000 years ago. It left a quite flat surface with a lot of minerals. Thus it has become a very rich farmland, but with few trees except in river valleys. And it tends to be puddle up quite a bit when it rains a lot. So a lot of water runs off, and there's a lot of tiling in this part to get the water to run off into the stream beds. And that's one of the issues that we have to deal with, the flooding, as we go along. Now, to the right of that is the Iowan surface, the headwaters and tributaries of several rivers. The Iowa River goes through that, the Cedar River, the Wapsipinicon, the Maquoketa rivers, 4 rivers in kind of northeastern Iowa. And this was shaped by an earlier glacial period, about 20,000 years ago. This area is hillier than the Des Moines lobe, and it has, as I said, all these different streams. Now, to the right of that, in the northeastern corner of the state, is what they call the Paleozoic Plateau, often referred to since a European settlement, as Little Switzerland because of its rugged, hilly landscape, which is not really favorable to farming. I think there are a lot of cows, perhaps, and a lot of milking goes on up there, dairy farming, but it's not really good for corn and soybeans. And of course, it's a nice recreational area. It's a nice tourist area. This area was not flattened by glaciers, but you can find fossils there that date from sea floors 300 to 500 million years ago. So it's you can see the remnants of very ancient geological formations. You might be surprised to realize that Iowa was covered by a sea that long ago. Then over to the other side, to the far northwest, are the northwest Iowa plains, characterized by high rolling hills and lots of loess, and that's wind-blown granular sandy soil that's very characteristic of the western part of the state. Soil that's been blown over from the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Wyoming, Montana, very dry areas that where the soil just kind of loosens up and it blows and it hits over on this side of the Missouri. The largest geological region is the southern Iowa drift plain. This area was covered 500,000 years ago by an ice sheet that extended into Missouri. In the 500,000 years since then, deep valleys have been etched into the landscape, particularly in the western part of the state. The hilltops are characterized by loess soils, so that those soils that blew off the plains into Iowa. To the far southwest is the Missouri alluvial plain, which you might remember was totally flooded throughout the summer of 2011 by snowmelt and heavy rains in the upper northern plains. Above the plain, this alluvial plain, are the loess hills, shaped by windblown sandy dirt from the plains over thousands of years. So it's very, very characteristic of Iowa. And the only other place where there's as much loess as there is in Iowa is in China, in the upper reaches of the Yellow River of China. But there's loess in other places also. Finally, in this far southeast is the Mississippi alluvial plain, including the lower reaches of the Iowa and Cedar rivers. Now all these regions shape the possibilities of life of all kinds. Botanical life, biological life, human life, agricultural and urban life in Iowa. This is kind of the foundation on which Iowa culture and life is built. I'll move on to the next slide here. And this shows elevations throughout Iowa. It's very interesting to relate this to the previous slide, partly because it doesn't seem to quite fit. It shows some real differences. Starting from the west, the Missouri alluvial plain is clear. That's very similar to what we saw in the previous map. And the List hills that rise up from it, you can see those hills rising up from the alluvial plain from Monona County and the southern part of Woodbury County on down. The high western plain shows up quite clearly, those areas there. And if you're very up north, the highest point in Iowa, about 1,600, 1,700 feet. It's not a mountain, but it's the highest part of Iowa. I think it's a hog farm, actually, north of Sibley. And then Iowa just generally kind of slopes to the southeast, which is the direction of most of the rivers east of that ridge. And I often call that the Continental Divide. It's not the Continental Divide, but it's the divide between the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers. It's a very distinctive part of Iowa if you go through there and see where, where you, as you're climbing up, going to the west, and all of a sudden you're going downhill. That's the divide. And this divide, the rivers then flow through the Des Moines lobe. You can see there out in the middle, down through the southern Iowa drift area into the Mississippi alluvial plain. And Little Switzerland, in the very northeastern part of the state, that Paleozoic era, doesn't really show up too well, except that it's not the highest part and it's not the lowest part of the state. But, it's very hilly and rugged and a very interesting part of the state to visit. So we'll stop here and we'll continue on with some other thoughts about regions in Iowa in the next presentation.